Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, March 14th, 2025. Happy Purim to everyone. And I hope people did get so drunk last night that they did not know the difference between Haman, the villain, and Mordecai, the hero. It is one of the few, it is the only holiday in the Jewish calendar in which you are mandated to get drunk. So it's a fun time for all. And kind of a important spirited moment for people in Israel and others who showing their defiance of the efforts to drive them into despair and self-doubt and self-loathing went all out last night, from what it appears, with dancing, partying in the streets, and general revelry. With me to discuss not that, but other very important matters, including an important anniversary, we have executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, our old colleague, National Review's Noah Rothman. Hi, Noah.
Hi, John.
Noah's here. We'll talk about why, one of the particular reasons Noah's here in a bit, but first, got a lot of news from yesterday. So here's how I break it down. We have news overnight of the release of one of the American hostage, Adon Alexander, who should be coming out tomorrow, I believe, along with 4 bodies of dead Israelis. What a great deal. Good work by Steve Witkoff and everybody to get one living person out while the ceasefire was extended for 2 weeks. I mean, I don't want this guy. I'm sorry, I don't want this guy like trying to sell me a car, be my real estate agent negotiating over a house. What a great negotiator. Oh boy. Genius. Okay, so that's Steve Witkoff and his magical Doha mystery tour. We have Chuck Schumer blinking and announcing that he will be voting, and therefore I assume has 7 other Democrats with him who will be voting for the continuing resolution averting a government shutdown, causing angst and horror in the House Democratic Caucus, which of course voted against the shutdown en masse, though it did pass with only Republican votes. We have Vladimir Putin rejecting a ceasefire, though we had a real moment of confusion around noon yesterday when people were reporting that he had accepted a ceasefire, which is one of the reasons why nobody trusts media. Am I missing anything else?
Withdrawal of a nominee, but that was sort of the previous day's news.
Well, we could go into a whole thing about this weird second-tier anti-Semite installation of crazy conspiratorial anti-Semites at the second tier of the foreign policy and defense establishment of the Trump administration, but that probably deserves its own show. So, Noah, as our guest, where you want to start with the?
Yeah, I'm going to throw you a curveball.
Okay, go ahead.
The real fun story today is the Democratic angst, as you put it.
I don't think that's a curveball at all. I think that's straight down the middle. So go ahead.
It's so much fun. Okay, well, it's a lot of fun.
Oh, it's like old times. You guys are already bickering. I love it.
Not yet.
We'll
get there. Right now, we're on the same page. It's very strange. So yeah, the reaction from reporters yesterday, Hill reporters, was the most satisfying from my perspective, because they were aghast at the lack of strategy on display. There seemed to be no plan B. The assumption seems to be among reporters, Hill reporters, Rachel Bade at Politico, Sahil Kapoor, which I think is NBC. They concluded at the outset of this, surrender declaration by Chuck Schumer, that there was just no plan B. They didn't think that Johnson would get a CR, and once he did, they didn't know what to do. So they were just asking for things that they were never going to get, to circumscribe DOJ, for example, to get Republicans to essentially sign on to a document that says Trump and Elon Musk just shouldn't be governing right now. They don't really know what the plan was. So ultimately, the Democratic Party's progressive wing that has expressed all this angst and frustration with their leadership, because what they want is theater. They want really good dramatic theater, scene-chewing displays of resistance-style opposition to Trump, and they're not getting it from the geriatrics in control of their party. I'm sure you guys have talked about this, New York City guy, Zoran Mamdani, who's really tapped into something, in my view. One of his first commercials was making fun of Chuck Schumer.
He's a mayoral candidate in New York City, running as the far leftist candidate in the June primary.
Democratic socialist who wants wants socialists to register as Democratic to vote for him in the primary in New York City. And his first commercial was making fun of Chuck Schumer, doing his little dance and summoning the semiotics of the 60s, 1970s protest era. And the commercial is, these guys just have no idea how to do resistance, right? We do. And that's what he was doing the other day when he was yelling at Tom Homan. So I think Democrats are really, and everybody knows the groups are on fire and the Democratic base is on fire, and they want to see some impotent display of hostility to the Trump administration that demonstrates your willingness to sacrifice your reputation, your political position, what have you. Just put something on the table and risk it for this moment. That's what Democrats are desperate for. And even if it comes to a shutdown, which apparently during this closed-door meeting was really, Democrats were very hostile to it, and including Kirsten Gillibrand, who was apparently screaming at a decibel level that could be heard outside the door about how disastrous this strategy was going to be. So they're up against a Democratic Party that doesn't care about strategy, doesn't care about tactics, just wants to see somebody set themselves on fire. And eventually they're going to get it.
Memories of 2011.
But it's interesting that the progressives, the activist class, both the ones that are elected in the House like AOC and others, and the outside organizations, which obviously put a lot of pressure on Democrats in the Senate in particular, I think they seem to believe that if there was a shutdown, that would just contribute to the idea that Trump and Elon are, that it's a chaotic administration, the Republicans would be blamed. But this is where Schumer, for all of his conceits, is really such a poor manager of power compared to someone like the very Machiavellian Nancy Pelosi, because behind the scenes, he was telling them all, maybe a shutdown. Yeah, that would be good. It would contribute to the sense of chaos and the economy's not doing great. But then when push comes to shove, he says, we're going to pass it. So he was also talking out of both sides of his mouth, but in a way that enraged his own coalition on the far left versus what Nancy Pelosi was always able to do in the House for quite a while, which is give them one little thing that would shut them up for a while or threaten them. She was very good at alternating between carrots and sticks. And it strikes me that Schumer has neither carrot nor stick for his progressive left wing right now.
This is a continuing resolution. So there are a couple of manifold ironies here. One of which is that despite what you're hearing, I listened to NPR this morning and heard this, despite what you're hearing about how this is designed to give Trump and Musk latitude to make severe cuts. This is the Biden 2024 budget. That's what a continuing resolution means. It means that all policies that are in place that were supposed to end as of midnight tonight or midnight Saturday morning, whatever, remain in effect. You're voting to continue the resolution that kept the government going last year into this.
Well, it's not a clean CR though, right?
It's not a clean CR, but it is 80% or 85%, the Biden budget. So this is a more complicated matter. It's not a new bill. It's not the Trump budget. It is a continuing resolution. And simply put, if it's voted down by the Senate, Democrats will be shutting down the government. They need to say, I want to shut down the government. Republicans in 2011, that's why I was singing Memories, wanted to shut down the government. In 2013, when Ted Cruz had his weird strategy for whatever the hell it was that he was strategizing, they wanted to shut down the government. Democrats have been spending 6 weeks talking about the horrors being committed against the federal government by Trump and Musk by shutting down programs and firing people. And then they were going to vote. Then the House voted and the Senate was going to vote to shut down the government, thus sharing in the idea that the federal government should stop working for the American people. This is their only issue. This is the only issue they're running on, is how the danger, the threat that is being posed to federal spending, federal workforce, federal regulations, federal buildings, federal everything. And then they're like, no, we're shut it all down. We're shutting it all down because resistance or because Musk or something. I don't even know what the logic is. So Schumer and the Senate Democrats, who clearly, like Gillibrand and others, like they have to do something. We're like, basically, are you all crazy? Like, why would we do this? Like, this is not. And I'm sure there's polling. We only have one public poll. Polling is, of course, very bad now. But according to Quinnipiac, 32% of the public would blame Democrats for a shutdown, 31% would blame Republicans for a shutdown, and the rest would blame Trump. My guess is adding Trump in there, of course, is an interesting game, because that's not really the question you want to ask. Because if they blame Trump, then neither Republicans nor Democrats will be blamed, even though if you use that formulation. I think they saw terrible numbers. That's what I think. I think they saw, how will you feel? Will you be positively or negatively affected, or will you feel positively about a government shutdown? And my guess is the numbers are hugely against a government shutdown. And Democrats were going to own it, because the term Schumer shutdown would have been correct.
Yeah, my galaxy brain take is that voters generally blame the party that wants the shutdown for the shutdown. So in 2018, 2019, it was Donald Trump saying, I'm proud. He said, proud to shut down the government. So people blame Donald Trump. Makes a lot of sense. This time you have people like Jasmine Crockett saying, you can't fire a furloughed worker. Gotcha there. So
talk about galaxy
they're
brain.
Rationalizing themselves.
I don't know what galaxy that is, but it's galaxy brain. It's the galaxy and the Jetsons, maybe. And AOC. Now here's where it gets interesting. So AOC came out and said, "We all feel betrayed. We're betrayed. We're betrayed. We're betrayed." So she has a decision to make in 2026, and that decision is: does she primary Charles Schumer as in the Senate race in 2026 in New York? And a lot of people want her to do so. I assume that her hesitancy is that she might want to run for Senate, though I don't know why she couldn't run for president, though I don't know why she couldn't do both. And Schumer, that this is what Schumer is scared of. That's why Schumer played the both sides of his mouth thing. Like, he knows he doesn't want to shut the government down. He's got to pretend that he does, because he's worried about primarying from his left, and Democrats are right to start worrying about primarying from their left. This, if they are following the Republican pattern after the shocking Obama, there is going to be during this Trump term, there is going to be an internal civil war in the Republican Party where progressives are going to be primarying non-progressives, moderate,
Democratic Party.
liberal, Democratic Party, right? That this is going to happen, and this will be one of the data points on the road. So, Abe, you got any?
Well, I mean, they can. I agree with you. They will do that. But what about the national mood here? I mean, the progressivism has. The Democrats have gotten so entirely flabby because they thought the world was their way, and they didn't have to. There were all these muscles that they no longer had to exercise. They were on cruise control. And it's like suddenly the cruise control stopped and they forgot how to drive or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So the Democrats who are going to come from the left to primary the centrists, how are they going to do? I mean, the country,
it depends on where you live. Like, that's the whole point. Is the House. The House is now an ideologically purifying body, right? Because of the great sort and where people live and how these things work. Jasmine Crockett of Texas, AOC, the Squad, people like that. We did see 2 defenestrations in the Biden years, right? Or of Jamal Bowman and Mondaire Jones were both sort of essentially defenestrated.
Cori Bush, wasn't she?
Cori Bush also.
So there were 3 defenestrations, but in districts where, in fact, these Democratic candidates were way out over their skis with their populations, which is not true of AOC. One of the reasons that this can happen is because Democrats, ideologically purified by the by the great sword in the House can in fact primary other Democrats. And the question is, what's that going to be like at the state level in Senate races in 2026? Now, you also have the phenomenon, which we haven't mentioned this week, of the flight to retirement. Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, after one bad poll, I mean, maybe there's more bad polls, suggesting that she would lose to Governor Chris Sununu, former Governor Chris Sununu, basically announced her retirement. We've had Senator from Michigan, Senator from Tina Peters of Minnesota announcing her retirement. A couple of other people. So the atmosphere in the Senate going into 2026 is Democrats are going to have a very rough night of it, and it's possible that rather than spend 2 years fighting to secure a reelection that is unlikely, you're going to have these preemptive resignations. And then the question, which we have, as I say, and then the question is, who's going to replace them? Is it going to be, like a person who can win, who sort of statewide tax a little more toward the center? Or will the party machinery, as was true in southern states in the Republican Party, will everything just tack left, and you're going to have Republicans running in these states against very beatable candidates and increasing the Republican majority in the Senate, to 56, 57 seats? Could happen. I mean, a lot we're in March, and that election is, 18 months away. So I don't want to overstate things, but they're the ones who are making this. Democrats are the ones who are making this path evident by
Alternatively, you could have a really bad environment in 2026, and Donald Trump could be virtually a lame duck by that point. Given the present trajectory, it's not hard to imagine. And the assumption, and the counter argument is, Democrats are doing the Nancy Pelosi thing and making way for the next generation under the assumption that 2026 will be actually a good night, which is counterintuitive given the signals that retirements usually send. The counter argument to that is Raul Grijalva, who passed away yesterday, who ran for re-election with stage 4 cancer, knowing that this was probably the likely outcome. So there's not necessarily a wave of prudence that's overtaking.
Well, okay, so prudence dictates that Trump will be a lame duck in 2027 because it is very unlikely that Republicans retain the House, given their 1 or 2 seat majority and the dynamic in a midterm. Like, obviously, Democrats would only need to win 4 seats, but net 4 or 5 seats out of 435 against an incumbent president to take control of the House, in which case advancing the Republican agenda starts coming to a screeching halt. So we're now just here talking about the Senate. I'm just saying that the statewide atmosphere, it's going to be very telling to see what these parties do in these states that are not firmly in one camp or the other, right?
But you're assuming coherence on the part of the Democratic Party, and I would just pose this question: who is the leader of the Democratic Party right now? Because we've got Tim Walz about to go on a barnstorming tour. We've got Pete Buttigieg kind of, putting his toe in the water. We've got Gavin Newsom sitting down with Steve Bannon. But all of that, and we've got Chris Murphy and others all sort of jockeying for the role of leader. But who's going to win? I mean, they're not bold enough to really kind of go for it the way that someone like a Trump or a Vance or on the Republican side would. So it's not just that they have these ideological commitments that they're fighting in the House and the Senate. It's that they are leaderless right now, truly leaderless.
That can be an advantage.
Right. Well, if somebody's bold, it is. But if they are all just kind of tiptoeing around.
I mean, the question is whether the agenda that they settle on to run on conforms with the reality of what the American people are seeing. In 2009, there was no leader of the Republican Party. The Republicans were smashed to smithereens. Democrats had, 60 seats in the Senate. Obama had gotten 70 million votes. They're passing legislation at will pretty much in the first 3 or 4 or 5 months. And then a populist movement arose without a leader. Like, in some ways, the leader of the Republican Party in 2009 was Dick Cheney, who was making speeches about the feckless foreign policy of the Obama administration. He was the retired vice president. Like that was weird. So stuff happened, but the thing is that when they came at the Obama administration essentially for being too left-wing and ignoring the Constitution and printing up those copies of the Constitution and hanging them out at Tea Party rallies and things like that, they were more congruent with the general mood of the public than the Democratic Party was, even though Obama had won. That was what the 2010 election, largely centering on Obama.
Well, and that was an ideological. The Tea Party was a bottom-up ideological movement, which then interest groups on the right also kind of co-opted or merged with, and then led to candidates that espoused that bottom-up philosophy of the Tea Party. It was, in a weird way, much more organic than what you see on the left now, which is a very entrenched, very well-funded left-wing series of interest groups. They are not organic. They are the opposite of organic.
Right. So I don't think that they need an issue set that is appealing not only to, Mahmud Khalil, but also to, some guy in Michigan who's like, you know what, I may have voted for Trump even because I couldn't handle it otherwise, but these guys are crazy and I don't like what Elon Musk is doing and this is pretty bad. That ability to expand the Democratic coalition a little bit will be under challenge from the fact that all of the juice in the party is on the radical side. And of course, the secret of the Tea Party, though people forget this, is that while Democrats screamed and yelled and said that they were all fascists, they were handing out the Constitution. They had rallies where they cleaned up the garbage as they were leaving. They went to town hall meetings and argued respectfully with the sitting Democratic congressmen and senators. It was a civilized revolt.
There was a lot of weirdness mixed in, though. There was a lot of
I'm not saying there wasn't.
birtherism and stuff going on in the.
That's always there.
No, I don't want to. I'm sorry. I don't want to romanticize it, but it was not that easy to say, oh, they're just a bunch of psychotics. This is just Ruby Ridge, at the polling place. Like, it was a much more complicated thing going on, and it was underestimated, underrated, and too easily dismissed by liberals and by the mainstream media. The question is, can Democrats or can Democratic groups foster the right mood? I think that
they're too elite. I'm sorry, but they're staffed by elite former undergrads from elite liberal arts colleges funded by elite money. And I think the real problem right now with the Democratic Party is it hasn't really had a true reckoning with its own elitism. That is really what I think had a huge force on the last election. And until they do that, AOC going to red states and sort of, I don't know what she thinks she's doing there, because she's not engaging them on their side of the issue. She's basically saying, I am the future. That's elite. I mean, that is a through line that I don't think they're going to be. It's not going to be easy for them to escape, because the only people in their party who are challenging that, people like Fetterman, although he himself comes from an elite background, and some of the newly elected representatives who are from the working class, they don't listen to those people.
Well, it's elitism, but it is also insularity. And those two things are probably hard to distinguish because they're concomitant. But insularity and the hothouse environment in which they inhabit. And that's a problem for both parties, where they're completely isolated from dissenting views and really get a charge out of just irritating the right people, just being as obnoxious as possible and being provocative and provoking the proper reaction. That seems to be like a profound source of psychological gratification I don't quite understand. But that's how you talk yourself into the notion that voters will really appreciate it if you shut down the government.
But this is the dynamic. Tea Party wouldn't have prospered had it not been for Obama's overreach. So we'll have to see what the it was a response. So Trump's we're in 7 weeks here. So we'll have to see where this goes. And of course, it's more complicated because the inflation numbers weren't bad and all that. But the economic news is not good. And Trump is Trump's behavior on the tariffs is obviously extremely inconstant. And, next by October, we'll have a sense of whether or not the public is feeling like there's interesting stuff going on in Washington that they kind of like, which would be the salvation of the Republicans, or like, well, we didn't want this. I guess we gave it a shot and we don't want this either. I mean, we don't know. We genuinely don't know yet where that's going to be.
By October, we'll be having the same conversation, right? Because the CR only goes to the end of the fiscal year, so it's September 30.
Right.
So we'll be having this very same conversation.
Right, but again, and if we're having the same conversation and the Democratic messaging still centers on the depredations of Elon Musk and efforts to spend less and make the federal government smaller, they're going to be in the same trap, which is, do they vote for something that helps make the government smaller, or do they oppose the thing that's supposed to help make the government smaller but then shut the government down? Like, it is kind of a brilliant it's like one of those Chinese finger, those the things where you put your fingers.
The finger trap. Yes, the Chinese finger trap.
Yeah. Okay. So
tell me you weren't watching Severance without telling me you weren't watching Severance.
I was watching Severance,
okay,
and I don't want to discuss what happened last night. It was yet again a Shonda disgrace.
Don't tell me.
Disgrace. Okay. Anyway. Okay. I know Abe's already given up on it, but
No. I'll keep watching it because it's interesting, but it's terrible.
No, I gave up on it. I stopped watching after the goat episode.
Yeah,
that was so smart.
That was already like War and Peace compared to some of the stuff that's followed. Anyway, we don't need to talk about Severance, but I am thrilled to be able to say that I was outraged by last night's episode, as I have been by the previous episodes, and the refusal to move the plot forward. Very Lost-like, as we have been saying. Anyway, let's move on from that. We have so we talked about the hostage release. We've now talked about the continuing resolution. I texted Abe yesterday morning after yesterday's podcast to say I'm going to look like an idiot because I said, well, Putin's obviously going to reject the ceasefire. Why would he accept the ceasefire? We're going with hand in hand, and what good is that going to do? And then the news came over the transom that Putin had accepted the ceasefire. So I said, oh man, people listening to the podcast this afternoon are going to think I'm a moron. And then Abe's like, I don't think that's that's just AFP, Agence France Presse, saying that he accepted the ceasefire. I don't see anybody else saying it. And then 15 minutes later came the actual story, which is that he had rejected this. He had said, theoretically, I'd love a ceasefire if it meant that that Ukraine was surrendering. That would be great. Sure.
Right.
We'll go. We'll take Kherson and 20% of their territory, and they'll lay down their arms, and then we'll kill everybody, and everything will be great. But until that happens, I'm not accepting a ceasefire.
Before the yesterday's news, and so after Ukraine had agreed to the ceasefire proposal, and the Trump administration said they're going to now put the ball in Russia's court, we were talking on the podcast saying, well, what do you think Putin's going to do? And Matt and I, or really me, Matt kind of agreed. I said that, I think Putin's going to give Trump something to work with here, to sort of talk up a peace while getting more for Russia. And John, you said, I think he's going to sort of flatly reject the ceasefire proposal. And I think he did both. Actually, I mean, there is no ceasefire, and he's now working on Steve Witkoff, or on Trump, using Witkoff as a relay.
So Noah, you were out of town. You were just complaining that you were on vacation last week and missed your opportunity to weigh in on the hijinks.
Yeah, it's just been a tragedy, a national tragedy. Yesterday, the Russian side apparently shut out Keith Kellogg. This is his peace plan.
Keith Kellogg is literally our envoy to the Ukraine-Russia war.
He wrote the thing. He's been as on board with the Trump administration's effort to cast Ukraine as the bad guy in this whole pageant. He equated them in remarks the other day, analogized them directly to a rented mule that needed a beating in order to get them to move in the direction they wanted them to go. So much for that. The Russians do not respond to obsequiousness. If you study Russian statecraft for all of 20 minutes, you determine that they respond to strength, they respond to hard power, they respond to physical, tangible limits, and nothing else. And they'll test and test and test. And my fear going into this thing was that the administration had presented itself in such a supplicating manner, had offered concession after concession, sweetener after sweetener, with no public understanding of what the Russians were supposed to come to us with, that he would present to Moscow a distorted image of what they could extract from Washington. And they would continue to make demands, subtle demands, the sort of, Russian-style demands, where you don't even know whether they're saying they accept the ceasefire or they don't accept the ceasefire, because they're saying everything in the same sentence. I mean, this is just classic Russian statecraft. And that's what we're seeing. And it's humiliating the United States. The United States is being mortified and subjected to an embarrassing spectacle by the Kremlin. And this administration presents itself as being uniquely sensitive to slights, really easy to offend, and very focused on intangible national assets like prestige and respect. But they're utterly contemptuous of anyone who suggests that other nations might value these commodities too. That's naive. That's foolish. Other nations make commitments based on raw material concerns, tangible assessments of their own position, and they don't value emotional nonsense like that, and that we shouldn't have a foreign policy like that. But they talk out of both sides of their mouth. I've written this piece a couple of times now. Politics happens in other countries too. Why are we seeing, the Canadian right collapse? Why did we see Greenland make, efforts to insulate itself against an American Anschluss? Like this happens in response to American rhetoric. American presidential rhetoric matters. This is something Republicans talk themselves out of, and yet they acknowledge it when the border suddenly gets quiet because presidential rhetoric matters. All of them, it's all situational. There's no consistency whatsoever, and as a result, we're talking ourselves and working ourselves into a corner that will be very difficult for us to extract ourselves from. This war isn't going to end because there's a lot of fluidity on the battlefield still. You can't have a ceasefire when both sides understand that they can achieve their objectives via military means. Sorry. That's just the reality of the world that we inhabit. You can try to muscle these parties into it, but we're only muscling one of them into it, which is to conclude that we're trying to muscle Ukraine into a surrender. That's, right. I think you said that actually recently this week. That
I believe
one party, if it's only one party conceding, it's not a ceasefire.
Yeah, right.
I do think, though, that you can't say yet that the U.S. has been humiliated. I think we're on our way, and I think ultimately we will be. But there are, I think, a significant number of people who Trump can continue to sell what's happening here as progress, too.
But domestically, right? Are you talking about foreign actors or a domestic audience?
Domestic, I guess. Yeah.
Well,
okay.
What does that mean? Get you?
But here, the one objection that I would enter to the. Okay, so let's just put it this way. He has said that because Ukraine agreed to the ceasefire, that military aid will continue to flow and that the intelligence sharing will be restarted. So Putin has now rejected the ceasefire. So the war continues. Proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating. He bullied Zelensky into saying he would accept a ceasefire, and effectively, though Zelensky hasn't said this, he is accepting the notion that Russia is going to keep the 18% of Ukraine that it has seized. Are the weapons going to flow? Are they going to get intelligence sharing? If so, then Ukraine can continue to fight the war. Will the Trump administration betray the promise that it made to Zelensky without telling us? We know that this can happen because it happened with the Biden administration and Israel. The Biden administration told us that arms were flowing freely to Israel during 2024. And then we heard when everything was over and Trump was in from Ambassador Michael Herzog, who is no right-wing lunatic, that in fact the Biden administration had been withholding important aspects of military aid from Israel. So could Trump do that without telling anybody? Sure. Yeah, they can do it. They can do it. They can do it tomorrow. Pete Hegseth could do it tomorrow.
I agree. That's really important, as well as the monitoring mechanisms. What institutions are monitoring the ceasefire? Are they capable of identifying violations? What are the teeth associated with those identifications of violations? What's stage 2? What are the metrics to get to stage 2? All that stuff matters, but it's speculative because we haven't gotten a ceasefire yet. What matters now is how Donald Trump pushes Russia into this negotiation. A lot of speculation that, wow, once we're done with this whole Ukraine muscling operation and Russia balks, wow, we're going to see Trump really lose his patience with Moscow. Still waiting. Still haven't seen any indication that this president has reached his limits of his patience with the Kremlin. It seems he has a bottomless tolerance for Moscow's prevarications and recalcitrance, but none for anybody who's an American partner or ally.
Right. Last point before we get to our special feature today. So today in a New York City courtroom, the case of Mahmud Khalil, now having been allowed to have 2 sessions with his lawyers, according to the order of Judge Jesse Furman, will proceed. And the Khalil lawyers issued their brief, and it went public yesterday about what claim that they are making about him. It's a very, very interesting document. It's worth reading because mostly it's a press release on his behalf, making the case that his free speech has been violated and talking about how his grandparents were forcibly expelled from Tiberias, Palestine. Tiberias being a city in Israel. This is a reference to the Nakba of 1948. Tiberias is actually a place in which the Haganah, the pre-Israeli IDF, fought a battle against Arab forces and won the battle, at which point the Arab population of Tiberias exiled itself, left town, having been on the losing side. So they self-deported, shall we say. They were not forcibly expelled. There was no forcible expulsion. There would have been a 2-state solution in 1947 under the terms of the UN partition plan, had the Arabs agreed to such a thing. He was born in 1993, so what the not actually forcible expulsion of his grandparents from Tiberias, Palestine has to do with him being born in a Syrian refugee camp for Palestinians in 1993 is not clear to me in any way, shape, or form, since of course you have 4 grandparents. And he has an Algerian passport. I don't know what that story's about. Don't know who paid for him to go to to SIPA, the graduate school of Columbia that he attended, and apparently finished his PhD or whatever in about 5 seconds, or whatever degree he's getting there. He's only there for 2 years. But here is the key element that I wanted. His story is bullshit, and there's a whole lot of bullshit relating to Mahmud Khalil and his life that we do not know or do not understand. And there's a whole press out there that could maybe find some of that out. But our friend Hugh Hewitt sent me this passage from the pleading at the court, paragraphs 82 and 83. Mr. Khalil's counsel did not receive DHS's asserted legal basis for his arrest and detention until the afternoon of Tuesday, March 11th. That's right, 3 days ago, pursuant to an agreement with counsel for the government. So in other words, he was arrested on Thursday. They did not present him formally with the charges of his arrest or detention. His NTA states, quote, "The Secretary of State has determined that your presence or activities in the United States would have serious adverse consequences, foreign policy consequences, for the United States, citing Section 237A-4CI of the Immigration and Nationality Act." The NTA further states, quote, "The Secretary of State has reasonable ground to believe that your presence or activities in the United States would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences." Paragraph 83 states, "The Rubio determination was exclusively motivated by Mr. Khalil's lawful, constitutionally protected past, current, or expected belief statements or associations." That's their claim. this is a Rube Goldberg machine, and maybe in a conventional courtroom, they give the game away here. The only formal communication that they've had with the government says the Secretary of State has determined that your presence would have serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. Under our laws, that should be enough for him to be expelled.
Well, do they have to demonstrate that to the satisfaction of a judge?
Yeah, well, obviously, because it's going to be in a courtroom. But my point is that there was no communication in which they said, the only communication that we know that they may have gotten an error was they said, we're arresting you for violating your student visa. The formal charge that they were handed by the government is the Secretary of State has determined that your presence has serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. And that language precisely mirrors the powers of the Secretary of State in the 1952 legislation, which gives the Secretary of State enormous latitude that may be unjusticiable, and that Judge Furman may find he does not have the standing to oppose.
Well, that's why they're doing the free speech claim, because there's a legally debatable question about whether he is covered by the protections of the Constitution, even though he is not a citizen.
Right, but it doesn't seem to me like it would be difficult to make the case if you had to make the case. And we have all the evidence in the world that the guy was associated with this group that was handing out Hamas propaganda. And the Biden administration demonstrated pretty conclusively that there were material links between the protesters and Iranian financial mechanisms. I don't think it would be too hard to at least infer some connection there, although you probably have to prove it to the satisfaction of the judge. Nevertheless, I mean, this seems like it's a risky test case, but the predicate is there, and the evidence seems to be there. I'm not
saying we should not be viewed. So all I'm saying is they have no evidence, because they would have put it in this document, that the government said to them, it's because of what you say that we are arresting you. They are asserting without evidence that is why the government is throwing them out, as opposed to saying, we're throwing you out because you blocked streets, you blocked pathways, you handed out literature, you're part of an organization called Samadun that is materially connected to, we don't even have to lay it out. I'm finding as Secretary of State that your presence has adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. But fine, we haven't seen the government's filing, but it will presumably lay a lot of that out. And yes.
But in the PR war that's going on, that the distinction you're making is crucial, but it's not the one they're making in the PR war. The PR war is acting as if the burden of proof is on the government to prove that he's a terrorist before we do anything to him.
Right.
But in this case, actually, legally, it is not. There is no burden of proof on the government to prove it. It's an assertion of executive power and discretion, and he can fight it through the courts, but it's a very different sort of battle than a citizen who's been charged with a crime or any of these things, which is why I think we had a delay, and this is all about PR, because if we had a delay before the wife was trotted out for very flattering profiles, clutching her pregnant belly and going, he's such a sweet man. So I am saying that with a lot of sarcasm, because the idea that this is going to detract attention from what his actual behavior has been and its consequences for Jewish students on campus, it should not. But again, this is as much a PR and political movement as it is a legal question for a non-citizen and his status.
Okay, so let's go into the PR thing. So first of all, if the PR effect affects the courts, then obviously that will be something if
it should not, but we know from past experience.
Courts, right, okay, yeah, okay. But let's say that somehow this is dealt with strictly as a matter of statute. You really think this is a winning PR issue? Who is a winning PR issue with? Is it a winning PR issue with the Columbia Journalism Review and the New Yorker and the people who say that the Trump administration is a fascist state and MSNBC? Yeah, it's a huge issue for them. 80% of the American people think that Hamas is a terrorist organization. The government is going to assert today that he has ties to Hamas. I don't know what that is essentially what they're saying, is that Rubio has determined that he is a foreign policy threat to the country because of his associations. Who wins the PR war?
But this is not just about Hamas on campus. That what I think the broader campaign is you should fear Trump, whether you're a citizen because he's a fascist or a non-citizen, even a legal green card holder. He could sweep you up and deport you at any time. And there are data points, unfortunately, that might boost that argument, although I don't agree with the argument. They are appealing the birthright citizenship decision. They are still pushing sort of ideological transformation of how we can determine who is and who is not a citizen anymore as part of their broader immigration policy.
But Christine, that presupposes there are more sympathetic victims out there than this guy. Right?
Yes, yes, exactly right. No,
there are
precisely
better faces for this cause.
On the PR issue, so yesterday, those protesting the detention of Khalil, where they protested at Trump Tower in New York. There's a video that was going around social media yesterday where some of these protesters were harassing a woman inside her car, cursing at her, spitting on the car, banging on the window, yelling, "I love Hamas."
Yeah. That's what I mean by the PR thing.
Yes.
Like we're seeing our own elite PR. It's clearly an elite PR loss, if one can say that there is such a thing. But here's how I would put it. Say you are the hackiest of political hacks. You're a person of no principle whatsoever. You'll say anything, you'll do anything. You're like an ambulance, whatever. You'll take a Democratic client, you'll take a Republican client, you'll argue anything as long as it gets you to 50.1%. Which side do you want if you have a political client? And you could somehow you can come at this as a blank slate. If you let's play the God, what's the guy's name? A theory, John Rawls game. You're the blank slate. You're the veil of ignorance. You could invent a candidate to run for office. Which side do you want to take? That's where the PR game ultimately comes down to. Where do you want to go? Because I'm telling you, you think it's been a bad week for the Trump people? I'm not sure it's been a bad week for the Trump people.
Well, this is where actually, to Noah's point, what would be effective if you want to win the Trump side of this PR war is to start arresting others who also are doing the exact same thing all across the country, who have these ties to terrorist financing networks and political networks and to Iran, and start getting them out of the country and say, it's not just this one guy. It's it's a network. It is a network, and we are cracking down on it because it is a danger to our country. That would be a more persuasive PR argument.
I presume that's coming. So we'll see.
But again, to strategy, they should have timed.
No, they did not handle this well. Yeah. They did not handle last week well. They sent in the wrong agents. They were briefed wrong. They didn't have their ducks in a row, and that's very clear. So though, there was, what is Stanley Kowalski's line to Blanche? They had this date all along. Like there was going to be this kind of confrontation all along. It's what has protected the students on campus from October 8th onward, is the idea that they're just exercising their rights to free speech and peaceful assembly, or as Matt would say, mostly peaceful assembly. So this was going to happen, and I'm saying that, like the CR and like the Democrat, I don't think they want to be on this side. I'm sorry. I don't think that
there's a huge risk, though, that they get an activist judge who just gives them a bad ruling, and then the Trump administration gets mired in process arguments, and then you're losing. And this is too important of a political project to mishandle. Imposing some caution and prudence on the humanities departments in this country is a huge priority for me. And to see that handled so cavalierly is disheartening.
Okay. So Noah, we wanted to talk today, it being March 14th. Perhaps people remember that 5 years ago, pretty much today, or maybe yesterday, the world shut down. COVID. I think it was on March 12th that the word came that Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson had tested positive for COVID, and then came the announcement either in the middle or just before the beginning of a Knicks game that the Knicks game was being canceled so that people would not gather at Madison Square Garden and then within 24 hours the entire country had sort of shut down. Schools were canceled, parks were padlocked, all that stuff, and then we were in hell. This then we, the four of us, working together, we did this podcast, Abe, Noah, and I, in an office at the Commentary offices, a little closet-like area with some sound baffles on the wall. And Christine, very laboriously, took us a long time to figure out how to do this, phoned into our soundboard, and we then did the Commentary podcast twice a week. And somehow it popped into my head that we should follow the pattern of Nightline in 1979, or what was simply called the America Held Hostage specials on ABC. ABC started doing, after the hostages were taken in Iran, a 15-minute news summary at 11:30 at night after the 11 o'clock news with Ted Koppel as the host, called America Held Hostage. And 25 years later, that program had been running for 25 years under the name of Nightline and was, in my view, the best production of television political news ever done in the United States. Anyway,
this is a bit of a digression because I was too young for this, but what on earth were they talking about every night during the hostage crisis?
Oh,
still hostage.
First of all,
day 198, still there.
They pulled it off. No, they had talking heads. They had people talking about what the strategy.
Still there? Yes.
And remember, there was an election. 1980 election was turning on the hostage deal, and then you had moments of, that was also Death to America protests, and were they
tie the yellow ribbon around the
tie the yellow ribbon. Yeah, there was a lot. Anyway, so I thought maybe what we should do is we'll do a daily COVID emergency news summary.
Yeah, I just want to add, this sounds very highfalutin and intellectual, which it was to some extent, but also all four of us were trapped in our houses going crazy. Yeah. And it was very cathartic to speak to each other on the deal.
We could have a conversation over Zoom, which we hadn't yet used, tape it over Zoom. And then we could it was also a way of figuring out what would go on the blog that day, since that was Noah's primary obligation, was writing the blog, and we'd have a sort of we'd have a brief
an editorial meeting.
An editorial meeting that we would do. And so we started that, I think, around the 17th or 18th of March, something like that, of 2020. And as it happens, that also happened to be the 5-year anniversary of the origin of the podcast altogether. I tell this story in my editor's letter in the April issue of Commentary, which should be up today, if it isn't already, at commentary.org, along with the rest of the contents of the April issue. It's up. Okay, so 10 years of this podcast is what we're here to talk about in the next 10 minutes or so. So, Noah, you came to me probably in 2014 and said we should do a podcast.
Well, you hired me in 2015, so if I came to you in 2014, that would be presumptuous.
Okay, so 2015, you came to me and said we should do a podcast, and I was like, no. I don't want to do a podcast. I've been doing the Glop Culture podcast for 3 years, which was there were a lot of stupid, incompetent technical issues related to that, and related to how Jonah Goldberg, Groblong, and I were technically incompetent at doing this over the phone, whatever. And so it was kind of nerve-wracking to me, and I only did that once a month. That was one thing. And the other was, as I said to you, I like things that are polished to a high technical sheen, and that's why we work very hard to make sure that the physical magazine of Commentary is as pristine, as physically attractive, and as high quality a physical product as you possibly have, and therefore I don't want us to be producing this audio program that will sound like amateur hour, and I don't want to, and I don't have the money to spend to turn it into the Daily or whatever, like a fancy
the Daily didn't
podcast.
exist yet.
Okay, but I didn't want it to be a fancy podcast like Serial or something like that with clips, and we cut in clips, and we had. So I was like, I don't want to do it. And you pressed me, and then here's the deal that we came up with, as I recall. We're spending no money. We get 4 mics and a soundboard. It was like $600. Plug it into a computer, and then we'll see what happens. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it'll be bad. If it's bad, we'll just stop doing it. Is that a fair
summation? And let me say first of all,
okay.
When you give me credit for inventing the podcast, I cringe over it, because as far as I remember, I think I pressed you maybe 3 times over the course of a year, and you really weren't that resistant. And then you said, it has to be low production value, and we'll see what happens with it, which is fine with me, because I came from a radio background, and knowing what AM/FM is like in the background, it's all chaotic, and it's all low production value, with the exception of production pieces with the lasers and the whistles and whatever, big announcer, that sort of thing. You don't need that for a podcast, and that's the only production value you have to worry about in radio. So low production value, that's radio to me. And then we did the one episode in the conference room without Abe. I don't remember when Abe came in. I think it was just the second episode, but the first episode was just us.
It was after a few. It was after a few. I remember we had a really weird first episode for me. For some reason, this was before we had set up the studio as a studio, I think.
Yeah, no, we were in our conference room, which was a very big room.
No, this was even weirder. The very first time I was on, we were all, John, sitting at your desk.
Okay.
In your office. Do you remember this at all?
I literally, I have no memory.
No, do you have some memory of this?
Vaguely, very vaguely.
But this is why we were not. This is good. It wasn't on YouTube, because one of the first times we had a guest before we'd figured out how to have more than 4 people at a time. Eli Lake came to my house and sat in the corner of my bedroom where I record from, and we were crouched over the same microphone. It's hilarious. I have a great picture of it.
So the point that I'm trying to make is, though, that John, it became your baby real quick. I mean, I don't remember it being my project for very long. It was a commentary.
Well, okay, but you were, to give you credit, you were the producer of the podcast. You were the only person who knew how to tape it, how to edit it, how to mix it. When we decided we were going to use this Mel Brooks song that opens the movie The 12 Chairs, look for the best, expect the worst, you figured out how to tag it, when to dim the sound out, how to add a little tag of music at the end. None of us would know. And what's more, to this day, none of us knows how to do that. None of the 4 of us, or Matt Continetti, knows how to do that. Saurabh Amari, who was on the podcast the first year, did not. You.
I like to maintain the illusion that it's all very difficult and technical.
Yeah, it was, but
you got to
trust
pay a lot
me, it was,
to get that kind of expertise.
Fair enough. So we did it, and we did it for 5 years, and it was good. People liked it, 10 or 12,000 people would download it. It was good. It was our promotion for the magazine. It was the way we were doing marketing for the magazine after direct mail laid an egg and was no longer a way to promote anything. And you didn't want to spend money advertising, because that wasn't going to get you anything, or was going to get you bad subscriptions that wouldn't stick. So this was a marketing game, and we did it very, very, very cheaply. And then Saurabh left, and Christine came on board on staff, and so it was then the 4 of us for 3 years, I guess, and it remained the 4 of us. And then came 2020 and the daily version of the podcast. And as I say in my piece, it is like a kind of endorsement either of supply side economics, or the Field of Dreams whispering voice that says, if you build it, they will come. Within 3 months, our audience had quintupled in size. Routinely in the summer of 2020, we were among the top 50 political podcasts on Earth. I don't know how it happened. We never promoted it. There was no way to promote it. How are we going to promote it? We were all locked in our rooms.
Well, that's how it happened.
That's how it happened.
Yeah, that's how everybody happened. Yeah, that's right.
Everyone was.
We had a captive audience.
Yeah, we had a captive audience,
literally.
and the news every day was getting crazier and crazier because the COVID story turned into the George Floyd story,
right?
And then
so COVID turned into George Floyd, turned into Trump's nightly disaster of a press briefing, to Biden in the basement, to the choice of Kamala, to these bizarre conventions, and onward anyway. And so apparently the conversations that we were having were of interest to people. We fell, over time we settled in to the audience that we now have, of which the people who are listening now are very kind and patient part. We remain among the top 200 podcasts in the world, for the most part, and it's been an incredible. And then Noah left us for National Review, and then we asked Matt Continetti to join, and then after October 7th, Seth Mandel came on to essentially cover the war on our blog, and then joined us as the fifth. So that is the history of the commentary podcast. Noah, you having done the twice weekly, having done the 5 times weekly, and now you are on, I'd say, half the time on the Editor's Podcast, which goes back to a twice weekly at National Review, back to a twice weekly format. I think what struck me is that it's like we never didn't have anything to talk about.
No, which is a struggle. I mean, some days we did have nothing to talk about. It's just you're very good at talking and making
about
nothing entertaining and enlightening. And you guys shouldn't rest on your laurels too much, because I don't think Commentary Podcast should have a monopoly on daily punditry. I'm lobbying very hard behind the scenes to give you guys a little nudge from the corners here. We're gonna go back to it in the mattresses. But the success of this podcast is a source of profound joy for me, and makes me very proud of the contributions that I've made to this institution. And I wish it well, and its success is not in any way owed to me, in any possible shape or form. You guys have made this thing into what it is today, and I hope to see its continued success up until the point at which we overtake you.
But by the way, it is interesting to me. I mean,
gauntlet thrown. I love it.
Gauntlet. There's the gauntlet. Listen. Leagues expand. The Mets came in. Did take them 8 years.
Right.
8 years to win a World Series, or 7 years to win a World Series. But it is striking to me how little competition we have had in that respect. I mean, obviously, Ben Shapiro does a daily podcast. He's in a different realm. I mean, he's like 10, 15 times our size, at least, if not 20 or 30 times. There are daily podcasts. It is striking to me, and I think part of that there hasn't been more competition, as you would say, or more, not even competition, just like more people ready to do this. And I think some of this
is really hard.
Well, I think you
make it look easy, but it's pretty difficult to have something compelling to say every day about what's going on in the news, because sometimes there's nothing going on in the news. Ben has your gift, and you have that gift. I don't. It's a struggle.
I'm not sure you're right. I mean, maybe the story is, and the one thing that I did not mention, and that we could sort of, is that I said we're not going to do any prep. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it. But I am not writing intros. We're not going to do any prep, because I did not want to invest the emotional capital in doing it in the early going. And though we have had conversations over the years about how maybe we need to change format, we should time our segments, we should be more like the editors.
We did that experiment where we timed our segments. That didn't work out.
Yeah. But like the editors, which is a wonderful podcast, the editors has a very, very strict, extremely well organized format. And, Rich makes an opening topic statement, throws it to one of the, first throws it to Jim Garrity usually. Then the second segment throws it to you, Noah. The third segment throws it. Then you guys talk about the things that you did last week, and then you talk about the pieces in the magazine and the website that you would like to recommend to others. Very precisely formatted. And I didn't want to do that because I thought it was going to be too much work, and I didn't want to have to do the work. So in the end, it became an improv, and maybe that's easier. It's what seems intimidating people is the fact of, as with all writing, for example, like the blank page, that you start with the blank screen or the blank piece of paper. But if you just start talking, and I guess maybe we had Trump, and then we had just had the world on fire. We've had the world on fire for 10 years. If it had been, the second Clinton or first Clinton administration, saying, although there was Lewinsky there, but if there had been, it's not like it's hard to find things to talk about.
Well, and we also all have weird hobbies and interests, sort of not both political and non-political. So it allows for a great bit of unusual trivia to pop up and turn the conversation in the direction of,
Right. All right, so I'm going to end with a commentary recommend, since we should be following our own format that we violate all the time by not even having one. But I do want to recommend on Netflix this new situation comedy called Running Point with Kate Hudson, which is essentially the fictionalized sitcom version of the life of Jeannie Buss, who took over the Los Angeles Lakers when her father. This was the subject also of Running Time. I can't remember the name, Showtime or Running Time or whatever on Max a couple of years ago. The sitcom about the show about the Lakers. Anyway, but Kate Hudson plays the newly installed CEO of her family's award-winning, but now a little down on his heels basketball team, because her brother turns out to be a crack addict, and she's the only one who can take over. And I've seen 2 episodes now, and it's really pretty good, very funny, with an absolute staggering breakout performance by none other than the seemingly troubled son of one Tom Hanks, Chet Hanks, whom you may have read about in the news over the last 10 years. He's got a lot of tattoos. He's a white rapper. He's said some things that are very controversial. Anyway, he plays like an out of control lunatic basketball player. And he is fantastically good. Like, he is really, really good. So that's Running Point on Netflix with Kate Hudson, and it seems pretty enjoyable.
My wife is really into it because she coaches basketball, and she made me watch it. Yeah, well, she coaches the kids basketball. Yeah, and she turns into Pat Riley during basketball season. Like, she's got clipboards and spreadsheets, and she's really working these kids, makes them do push-ups if they don't listen to her. Like, she gets into it. So yeah, she likes basketball stuff. And
are push-ups still a thing?
Oh my God, yeah.
No, I thought
they're very important for women to maintain upper body strength.
I thought people do other weird.
Well, they're entirely punitive.
Is it the full body? But is it the full body push-up, or is it the knee? You put your knee on the ground. And then
absolutely not. No,
that's not a push-up gun. No. If you put your knees on the ground, it's not a push-up.
Yeah, it's the real deal.
God,
but she liked that show. I had no idea that was Chet Hanks. He is pretty interesting.
He is pretty dazzling. Yeah, no, I mean, the one thing I was never able to do my entire life was the chin-up. They used to desperately try to make you do the chin-up, and there were all these kids who were like, okay, and they put the hand up, and they would leg up, and then they got the chin over the bar.
You don't come to the commentary podcast for upper body strength. None of us here could
we
pass
do have a black belt.
Exam.
I'm never going to tire of saying that we have a black belt on this podcast.
Yeah,
it's true.
Our own Christine Rosen, a martial arts black belt.
I remember, John, when we were joking actually about what to call the commentary studio. You said something like "no muscle shoals," and I said "flabby road."
Good times. Good times. All right. Well, Noah, thank you so much for joining us for this trip down recent memory lane. And we'll be back on Monday. So for Christine and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.